La 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 la. So I'm tone deaf. Tonal issues all day long. And a lot of us have that when it comes to being able to sing or carry a tune. Now, the problem is when it comes to that, most of the time we are singing along with our song that we like. So we're hearing more of that than we're hearing of ourselves. And so therefore we delude ourselves often into thinking that we are hitting those same notes that that artist is, which by the way, that artist, a lot of times they have an auto-tuned engineering professional that is, sometimes monitored what you're hearing. So it's not actually their pitch either. But the thing about tone is when we delude ourselves, we do that also with how we communicate. We don't hear the things that we think that we do, and therefore it can be sometimes offensive or abrasive to the person receiving our message. So, in a professional setting, I would say we're probably a little bit more mindful of it because it's our bosses. Maybe not so much with our coworkers sometimes. I see that quite a bit. But with our bosses, we're definitely going to be more formal or more aware of what we're saying because this is the person that holds our raises, our ability to provide a livelihood, and things like that. So we're a little bit more aware with that. But with other people, we can be a little less formal, actually casual, and sometimes I don't know if there's less than casual, but when we just get into slangs, we get into sarcasms, we get into tones that may not always work for people, and sometimes they do, but just in a particular moment. So if you're having a bad day or they're having a bad day, that can be sometimes problematic. And I think we've all experienced it. So tonal issues, being tone deaf. What do we hear when we're talking? We hear us. We hear what we want to hear most of the time. Now, there's something to be said about effective listening, and I believe that's part of what I'll get to here in a little bit. But just off the top of my head, just my thoughts, when we have communication breakdowns, especially in intimate or interpersonal relationships, it seems like that becomes one of the things that we most talk about is your tone. I didn't like your tone with that. Or when we've heard motivative speakers, sometimes some people don't care to hear their tone. I'm sure a lot of people have had that with professors or just figures of authority. We didn't care for their tone, but we went ahead and went with their tone because they were a figure of authority, or like I said, a boss, an employer. So a lot of times when it's somebody above us or can affect the way that we are going to progress from the particular point that we're at, sometimes it can be a little problematic. And like I said, we can be a way more loose with the tongue and the attitude when it comes to people that we aren't connected to in that particular way. Sometimes it's the opposite. You might just find some people who will push back against authority, but give every consideration to the person that they're connected to closely. So, tone deaf. We got to start hearing what sometimes the people are telling us about our tone. Now, we may not exactly know what that means, but we can definitely take some pointers. So, I would say, recommend that we take pieces from our professional life or where we would be more formal and apply it to other areas. So, in this article that I found for on the professional development, Harvard Division of Continuing Education, 8 things you can do to improve your communication skills. So, number one is be clear and concise. Um, they speak to communication being about word choice and whether written or spoken, whenever possible, use brevity. So just be very clear when it comes down to exactly what you're going to talk to this other person about or what you are writing your points about. Drawing out will sometimes lose what the potency in your message will be. Let's see, before engaging in any form of communication, define your goals and your audience. So, knowing the temperature of your room, knowing what's going on in their minds, knowing what you want to convey to them. And again, be very precise with it. Have your punch come straight rather than a big looping punch for any boxing fans or anything else like that. Um, and they speak to while repetition may be necessary in some cases, be sure to use it carefully and sparingly. Repeating your message can ensure that your audience receives it, but too much repetition can cause them to tune you out entirely. So, a lot of times, again, when we've been in these relationship sort of talks, well, I just don't think I was heard. Or did you know, again, I just want to make sure that you, and after a while, it's like, so when you're using those repeats to say, feel this way, or I feel that way, or I think this way, or I think that way, use it in moments where it's going to have a high impact. That way you don't have to continue to use it. If you can hit that nail with a hammer once really good, it'll drive it in far, if not all the way in. So you don't have to tap, 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 and then it starts to get bent, and that's your listener. They start to become disengaged with the point that you're trying to make, which is to just boom, get it right in. So number 2, prepare ahead of time. That's a good one, because I don't think a lot of times people think of those things. And what happens is then you get in the moment, and then you're caught in trying to just, think of it, and now you're doing almost what I'm doing, which is, well, you don't quite know how to convey it the way that you would have had you taken the time to sit down, maybe write yourself out a list, or what I like to do, sometimes meditate on it or apply it like the game of chess. Now, it may not be a one-time incident. This could be something that I've personally dealt with, where you deal with somebody on a regular basis, and it's something that you have to communicate. So most of us are creatures of our own habit. We go to the same places, deal with the same people. So if you know that you're having an issue, or you have to communicate a certain way to a certain person all the time, take a moment when you're away from it and say, the next time, I know that if I say this, they're going to say that. So it gives you the situational awareness to say, well, I'm going to make sure that when they say that, I'm prepared with this. Or if I know that this person is always going to ask me for that, I'm going to have it ready. So then it just keeps things going. So these may be physical exchanges, like papers or a package or something like that, but it can also be how we're expressing ourselves to one another and exchanging information or intellectual thoughts or philosophies, what have you. So tone can play a huge part in that, because if you are prepared and aware, which means you were aware that you needed to do something, so now you are prepared. Another video, by the way. But if you have that mindset, it can take a lot of the tone out, because now you're just speaking in a lane, you're speaking matter of fact, and I think that can take a lot of I don't want to say misinformation, because you are speaking exactly what you need to, hopefully, but they will receive it that way. They will receive it just for what it is. It's a straight line. They don't have to, well, what did they mean when you said that? Because it didn't sound like you meant that. So prepare ahead of time. Know what you're going to say and how you're going to say it before you begin any type of communication. So years ago when I was teaching in a dojo, think before you act is what we taught the students. Think before you act. That doesn't have to just mean engaging in self-defense or anything else. Think before you act, the act of speaking. So, however, being prepared means more than just practicing a presentation. Before a performance review, for instance, prepare a list of concrete examples of your employees' behavior to support your evaluation. That's a good one on the flip side. So you may be going in asking for a raise and listing out why these things would matter, and your boss might have some other things that say, well, your attendance is a little bit shaky, and we had a couple issues with those reports back, in June. So if we can clean those up, then maybe we can, sit down and hammer something out that's going to be in both our best interests. It's just possibilities. So before entering into any conversation, brainstorm potential questions, request for additional information or clarification and disagreements, so you're ready to address them calmly and clearly. Can't stress that enough. The calmly and clearly part will definitely dictate what we're talking about when we're talking about those tonal issues, and especially being tone deaf, because when you revert back into a self-defensive or sometimes an offensive position, that tone will definitely come out. And if you really want to see what's inside somebody, trigger them. 3, be mindful of nonverbal communication, body language, eye rolls, eye contact, Just anything. I know that there's things where they say, things like this or this. Be mindful. Is that where we're going with that? Because a lot of cases, if you're in that pocket of being too repetitive, that might be where this person's getting to. They're showing you that they're antsy. Like, okay, I'm ready to move on, and I'm looking at my watch. I'm looking at people around you. Might be saying that you're going on a little too much. So our facial expressions, gestures, and body language can and often do say more than our words. They are spot on with this. Nonverbal cues can have between 65 and 93% more impact than the spoken word. That's big. That's big. And again, it's like being tone deaf because we don't see it. We don't see it. So when we start doing this or this or this, it's habitual, but to the person that you're speaking to, they're picking up on it because they may not always know you to do that. And especially if it's in a more formal position, a lot of us aren't trained to say, I have to hold my posture, I have to maintain my frame and be able to really endure through this, even if it's boring, even if it's something that's uncomfortable to hear, even if it's, something that's, I sat down at a job interview one time, and a man told me he was going to pay me 3 times per week what I was making at the current job that I was at. And I sat like this, and I thank you so much. But inside, I was bouncing off the walls. I was there. You have to keep calm is the point to it. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie. I believe it was, what was it? It's not Reservoir Dogs. I can't remember. But Tim Roth was having to tell a story, and he had to repeat the story, and he had to learn the story about when he was being part of this undercover operation. He was an undercover cop, but he had to tell this story to these gangsters. I think it was Reservoir Dogs, but he had to be able to tell this story so clearly and concisely, but he had to stay cool in that moment. And part of it was his tone. The tone was just, this is every day for me. I had a bag full of stuff, and I'm in this bathroom with a bunch of cops, and the dog is barking at me, and I've got some drugs in the bag. It wasn't a real story, but the way he told it with his communication, being cool as far as nonverbal, and everybody that was listening to the story was locked into him. So it showed that they were interested. They weren't scratching their head, looking around, or anything else. Good movie moment, but one of those things. So getting back, being mindful of nonverbal communications. Leaders must be also able to control their own nonverbal communications. I've come across some bosses that once you start expressing something, you can immediately see that they're not interested. And that's a sad place to be, but they're human. So this is just where we're going to go with it. They're human, and they're entitled to that as well, because you are allowed to have, your own ups and downs, sleepless days. So when you get to work, things like that. It happens, but it's a professional environment. So when you're talking about personal environment, you still want to give the same attention. And sometimes you want to give it a little bit more because this is a person you are invested in a different way than just a job. So depending on what, I guess, has your priority higher, are you chasing, junior partner at the law firm, and this is someone you're casually dating, or is this a 10-year marriage and you just started, at this job? Either way, you should treat people equally, but it is what it is. Your nonverbal cues must at all times support your message. At best, conflicting verbal and nonverbal communication can cause confusion. At worst, it can undermine your message and your team's or partner's confidence in you. So, and your mission and themselves. So if you're in leadership, or if you are trying to inject something that will benefit, whatever it is that you are in, yes, make sure that your messages are matching your words and your body language. So a lot of times this is the best, this is the best match that we have. But a lot of times it can't just be about anger and aggression. We have to make sure that we have other pieces in place to match what we want to relay to everybody. A confident pose, eye contact, things like that, addressing sometimes both sides of the room if that's the case, or making sure that this person that you're speaking to genuinely does understand that you have a real want to reconcile or have solution for whatever might be going on. Uh, Watch your tone. Here we go. Here we go. How you say something can be just as important as what you say. As with other nonverbal cues, your tone can add power and emphasis to your message, or it can undermine it completely. I'm just going to keep going with this one. Tone can be an especially important factor in workplace disagreements and conflict, or personal. So, what they're speaking to is more professional stuff. But I definitely think that, wow, this is something that we all can do because we all do it. We all can have a little sass or a little, and it can be regional, it can be cultural, it can be a lot of different things. I've dealt with people in different areas of the country, different areas of the world, and you can misconstrue something just based off of the way they project their bits of maybe humor or or seriousness or things like that. So it just depends. So watching your tone doesn't necessarily mean this sort of thing. It just means, again, knowing the temperature of the room, knowing who you're speaking to. um, let's see, what else do we have? A poorly chosen word with unclear or negative connotations can quickly lead to misunderstanding, and this can be a problem. This can be a problem. When speaking, tone includes volume, projection, and intonation, as well as word choice. So, um, yes, I've recently had this. I had this very discussion with somebody who could not understand the difference between yelling and tone, and they thought that they were the same. And I I slightly disagree with that because I think that you can have very sarcastic or biting or whatever tone that you want speaking at a level like this. Whereas yelling can just be, I'm just yelling because I'm yelling. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are the same thing. But I guess tone, it can fit in there. It's akin to me, but I think that there is a bit of a difference. So that's just where I'm going with that. But in real time, it can be challenging to control tone to ensure that it matches your intent. So again, real time, if you've taken that piece from earlier, be prepared and you have a better chance of controlling your tone, volume, pitch, whatever it is that you are trying to relay. And you take out a lot of the extras, they can actually derail whatever it is you're trying to impart to this person. So, being mindful of your tone will enable you to alter it appropriately if communication seems to be going in the wrong direction. So, no, 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 that's not what I meant. As opposed to, that's not what I meant. Those two things in itself. Hopefully, one came across as more reassuring, and the other came across as being more frustrated and just, detaching from the situation. Like, I'm done with this. So, tone can, and you didn't have to yell them either. Tone can be easier to control when writing. Yes and no, because we all know what text messages can do a lot of times. And again, they're speaking more professionally. I'm kind of looking at this as personal and professional, but we all know that people can choose particular words. And when you choose particular words, they can have a specific meaning to them. And sometimes it can be a little biting, whether they mean it to be or not, but that can come across that way. And so a lot of times, this is why I think text messaging is a very bad idea when trying to have solution for conflict, because you really need to be able to see somebody's inflection, see their facial, what we're talking about, body language, things like that. That way you get a full picture of what this person is saying. Emojis are not going to replace what somebody's facial features are doing. And if you're talking about in a professional setting, you definitely don't want to be text messaging and doing those sort of things. Now, I will say that there's something to be said in a professional environment about writing things, sending emails, things like that, because now you have receipts. You have the ability to say, well, let's go back over and look over those things rather than, well, you said this and when they may not remember. So in professional, writing is probably a better idea. But if you're trying to just, figure out, where that argument with your girlfriend or boyfriend went wrong, sit down and talk to them. Give them an actual call. And when engaging in heating dialogue over email or other written medium, like I was saying, don't be too hasty in your replies. Send. That'll show them. That's a big mistake because you cannot unsend that. Just like if you were saying da 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 to your partner, they can't unhear what you just said, and you can't unsay it. So be very mindful. Be very mindful of that tone. Think about what you want to say, because a lot of times we have the ability to think of these things ahead of time. So we want to make sure that we're definitely in our best space to be able to convey that. Practice active listening. Whew. How many times do we have people that just say whatever comes to mind, and you know that they didn't hear a word that you said? They've been talking this entire time, then they've been listening just to be able to talk again. It's just like when you talk, they're just breathing in between what they want to say next. So communication nearly always involves two or more individuals. Therefore, listening is just as important as speaking when it comes to communicating successfully. Amen. The goal of active listening is to ensure that you hear not just the words the person is saying, but the entire message. So, going back to the body language, attentiveness, things like that, giving the speaker your full and undivided attention. And body language is going to show that you are engaged in what they're saying. Sometimes that head nod, yes, maybe even a bit of a curious, yeah, you're right about that. Clearing your mind of distractions, judgments, and counter arguments. Again, if you go in with, oh, I'm going to show them, well, then you're not listening to what they're saying, and you may miss a whole point that may take a lot of the aggression out of what you were thinking. So a lot of times, listen to somebody possibly in a relationship waving the white flag. You know what? I was wrong. Don't come back at them with that. Well, I just want to make sure that, no, because you're going to torpedo what they're saying, and you may put them back on the defensive, and then you have, scratched a real possibility for a solution. Same thing in the workplace. Avoid the temptation to interrupt with your own thoughts. How many times do we talk over somebody because you want to get that point out? Now, there is something to be said when somebody is in a run-on, especially in a personal relationship. If they are running on because they can't just wait to tell you about all the things that you've been doing wrong and how they felt about it, well, if you let them go on for a good 2 minutes, you've lost what you need to maybe, clarify at the first 10 seconds. So a lot of times you do have to, I would say, can I just get a word in there because I'd like to address that? But make sure that it's not, well, when's it my turn? Because that's not going to give them anything to really trust in what you're going to say. It sounds aggressive, and it is. And again, this is where being prepared, there's so many things to this, these steps that are going to lead you right to here, that you're going to be able to hopefully communicate in a positive way with a calm tone. Avoid the temptation to interrupt others with your thoughts. Again, very important. Showing open, positive body language to keep your mind focused and to show the speaker that you are really listening. This is feels a little judgmental, doesn't it? Sometimes you just got to be open. I've had discussions with girlfriends where they're curled up in a ball on the couch, and I don't mean full fetal side position, but you can tell they're very drawn in. It's almost like if you, and I'm not calling people animals, but if you've seen a dog with its tail down or a cat with its tail fluffy or things like that, the body language will tell you exactly what they are experiencing internally at that moment. So keep your body language light. Keep it, not stern, not aggressive. Keep your movements less herky-jerky. And that goes either way when it comes down to professional or personal. You definitely don't want to be doing too much of this in a relationship. And what did we see? Howard Dean, the presidential candidate? Yeah! It's kind of, yeah. So it was sad that he didn't, do better. But, body language and tone. And it was a strange thing to do, but I digress. Rephrase or paraphrase what you've heard when making your reply. So if I'm being clear with this, or so you were saying, rather than, well, let me get this straight. So wording and tone hopefully would allow, and sometimes just ask, okay, can you go back over that? I want to make sure that I have it right, but I want to make sure that I have it right. The tone. So we just want to make sure. Ask open-ended questions designed to elicit additional information. That's a good one, because a lot of times people, if they're mindful that there's two people in the conversation, they will put a cap on exactly what they're saying at some point. And this is probably a little bit more professional because you have writing points, bulleted points. Now you'll be able to say, okay, pop. Well, okay, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Now, on this, will we be able to have this done by the next quarter? And that will allow them to give you additional information. They may have some other subnotes to what they want to speak to if they haven't already covered it. And in a personal way, so is it is there more that I can do? How can I help in this circumstance when you're feeling this way? Maybe it gives them a little bit more to speak to, and it may give either side something to speak to in the moment with a question that you weren't prepared to ask them and they weren't prepared to answer, but it's still there's something to be said about spontaneous answers that sometimes might be a little bit more natural, where it just comes out of them. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that I felt that way in either case, but it allows that a little bit more information and communication comes out. Number 6, build your emotional intelligence. Communication is built upon a foundation of emotional intelligence. Simply put, you cannot communicate effectively with others until you can assess and understand your own feelings. That's a big one because we get into our own feelings. What do the kids say? You're in your feels or you're in your feelers and things like that. So when you are aware that certain things will be able to set you off, you want to be prepared for that. Again, this list is just really fantastic because it tells you to go back and be able to, go over certain things and have things prepared ahead of time. So you are the best version of yourself going into a board meeting or that sit down with your better half. Leaders with a high level of emotional intelligence will naturally find it easier to engage in active listening, maintain appropriate tone, and use positive body language, for example. So you can be a leader in your relationship, or you can be leading the conversation in that relationship. It doesn't necessarily have to be just in the workplace. Again, these are great pieces to mix and match back and forth and carry on both sides. Understanding and managing your own emotions is only part of emotional intelligence. The other part, equally important for effective communication, is empathy for others. Now, how many times do we hear, well, you don't care, you must not care, you don't care how I feel? Well, you might, but you just may not be showing it to that degree. And to be human, if we hear it in a context that we are in a heightened sense of defensive or offensive posture, which means we don't have our emotional intelligence under control, then yes, we may come across very unfeeling towards that other person. And you can see it in the workplace as well. My boss doesn't care. He barely even heard me. And I'm sure bosses say that as well. Did you see how ungrateful they were? They didn't even bother to hear what I was trying to, get across from them. And that can have on both sides, a damaging, lasting effect. Let's see, empathizing with an employee or person, for example, can make a difficult conversation easier. Now, you may still have to deliver bad news, but effectively listening to their perspective and showing that you understand their feelings can go a long way towards smoothing out the hurt feelings and avoiding misunderstandings. Some things are just unavoidable. You're going to have to say what you have to say. But if you can have some empathy towards how they may feel about it, it may at least help them take that. So a little bit of sugar helps the medicine go down, so to speak. Develop a communication strategy. This says develop a workplace communication strategy, but I think, again, you can always have a good strategy in all areas of life. So let's see, even the most effective communicator may find it difficult to get their message across without a workplace communication strategy or without the workplace, just a personal communication strategy. Look, as a younger man, I did not have all these pieces in place for myself to say, I can effectively communicate. I can get out what I need to without some sort of, anger issue, without it being, turning into a yelling match. And I think that's a lot for anybody at a certain age. You have to mature and get into these places and these pockets where you grow, you understand, you learn lessons from previous things and say, I don't want to do that again. I don't want to go through that again at work. I don't want, any of these things. So you try to improve, hopefully, with each time out. But definitely, it can be difficult to relay any message if you aren't in a positive place with yourself. And we see this with small children. This is why we tell them, use your words. So it's no different for adults. We just have to use different words and use them in a different context at a different time, depending if we're dealing with a loved one or a boss. A communication strategy is the framework within which your business or your relationship conveys and receives information. It can and should outline how and what you communicate to customers and clients or friends and family, and moving forward. Let's see. It can be detailed as how you communicate, including defining the type of tools you use for information. So how are we using this? Are you using PowerPoint and notepads, or are you just using love notes and, affirmations, love affirmations? However you're communicating that, it really should be built into how you're going to communicate with that particular person, possibly on that subject or on a more consistent basis. For example, you may define when it's appropriate to use a chat for the entire team or organization, or when a meeting should be summarized in an email instead. Same thing. Honey, can I talk to you over here? Or it's just something more simple that probably can be said in front of the kids, or at a function where there's other adults. So just again, knowing your audience, knowing what it is that you're trying to relay, and is it simple enough just to pass on, or is it something that you really need to have a sit down about? Create a positive culture. This says organizational culture, and I think you can be organized personally or professionally. They mentioned the corporate culture in which you're communicating also plays a vital role in communication. In a positive work environment, one founded on transparency, trust, empathy, and open dialogue. That's not just a work environment. That is a personal one as well. Communication in general will be easier and more effective. So that ebb and flow, the give and go. If you think about basketball, John Stockton, Karl Malone, the pick and roll, they ran it to perfection because they were in a pocket of knowing what the other person's going to do. And what did they do? Not only on game day, they practiced it. So always have it in practice. Don't just pull it out to think like it's going to work at a particular time. You want to get to the point where you can almost look at the person and have a professional idea of what's going on. I have a wonderful relationship like that with one of the women at work. And there's times where I can just get to what she needs before she actually asks for it, because I'm paying attention. And I can see her body language. If she's looking around, I know if she's writing something, I know what's going on. And I've had some wonderful relationships where we can be in a situation in public and just look at each other and know, yeah, okay. So it's a good thing to have on both sides. The most dangerous organization is a silent one. That's a good one. And while I'm all for silence in a relationship as well, just like having quiet time, silence as far as not being able to effectively communicate, that can be problematic, because then one day you're just going to find out that they had all these things to say, and it may be in a Dear John letter. So you want to make sure that you are effectively communicating the entire time. That way you don't get to that point where, well, maybe not a Dear John letter, Dear John text or something like that. If you refuse to share information, you aren't open to suggestions, and refuse to admit mistakes and accept criticism, you're likely to find that you're going to be on the short end of what can be a positive solution or resolution. So make sure that, again, being open to hearing things, and that speaks to emotional intelligence, knowing that we're not perfect, and that's okay. But you also have to be able to hear it and understand that this is this person's perception. This is their opinion. They're allowed to have it. Now, you may have some things that may be more structured to say, well, I understand how you're feeling, but let me remind you that X, Y, and Z. So while you are, having a criticism of me, in this instance, I can show that I actually did the things that you were criticizing. So a lot of times that's important as well. But again, keep a calm tone when saying that. So, well, I can tell you about this. And remember the time that I did that? Doesn't work out that well. And so we want to make sure that we're bringing the levels down. Let's see. Communicating with coworkers and employees, I'm going to put that in parentheses because it could be friends and family, is always going to present challenges. Maybe, and I think sometimes you can communicate at work easier with some people than you do in your family. So we've seen it go both ways, but there will always be misunderstandings and miscommunications that must be resolved. And unfortunately, messages, they said corporate messages, aren't always what we want to hear, especially during difficult times. Well, it can go both ways. You're really stressed out, and they've got some real things that they, need to speak to you about. So, and of course, we don't want to hear about, cutbacks or things like that, or even mandatory overtime. Some of you guys might like the extra money, but sometimes you just want to get out and live your life. So, tone, don't be tone deaf. Practice your emotional intelligence. Let me go back over these. I'm not going to go back over them, but we want to know. Be clear and concise. Be clear and concise. Prepare ahead of time. So clear and concise, just a quick potent shot. Boom, just give it to them. Just think about like, boom, a little shot of medicine or something like that. That'll get into their system. You don't have to have a whole big drawn out, medical kit. Just boom, get that NyQuil in you. Prepare ahead of time. So you want to go into this like a chess match. You want to have the notion that you have an idea of what possibly is to come. And here's your situational awareness. Be prepared and aware when you go into into any conversation. Be mindful of nonverbal communication. What are they relaying to you, and what are you relaying to them when it comes to your body language? Watch your tone. When it comes down to seeing and knowing how you can perceive things and how things can be perceived, then that can be a big issue. So you really want to watch exactly the energy that you're putting behind it. Practice active listening. Practice active listening. Make sure that when you are talking about active listening, you are hearing not just to talk again, but you are really internalizing. And remember, ask some follow-up questions, because that's an important part of this. Building your emotional intelligence, understanding who you are and who you are, not only as a personal person, but as a professional person. Those can have differences. So when we're casual versus professional, those can be different things. And we don't always want to try to intermix them, but down the middle, there should be a piece of you that remains on both sides. Emotional intelligence. Develop a workplace communication strategy, or just a communication strategy. How you are going to report, things to your boss. How are you going to tell, your loved one that you're home at night when they're not around? And then also create a positive organizational culture. And that can go both ways. Again, the organization, the structure of which your workplace and your relationships are built upon. So guys, hopefully this helps. I know this was a lot, but I wanted to bring something a little bit different. So hopefully you have an ace up the sleeve advice, comment, experience that you can impart to this. And I hope this finds everybody in a total place or pursuit or beginnings of health, mind, body, and soul. We'll see you guys on the next one. Peace, love, unity, solidarity. And I will try to put the link down in here to this article so you can check it out. And we'll go from there. We'll see you guys on the next one. Trigger them. Find out if they're calm or not, because you'll see if they've done that work on themselves. Trigger them, because in a lot of cases, you will see a bit of a different person come out. And that's not necessarily a red flag, but it's something to definitely make note of.